Hey there, and welcome to Tales by June, where hearts break, heal, and sometimes seek revenge. Let's begin today's story.
Hey, before we begin, let me know where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy this kind of content, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.
The hall shimmered under golden lights, every chandelier reflecting off crystal glasses and polished smiles. Laughter rose like soft music, mingling with the faint hum of jazz and the clinking of champagne. It was the university's annual reunion, a gathering of old faces and new fortunes. Success stories stood shoulder to shoulder with nostalgia, all wrapped neatly in satin and conversation. At the far end of the room, Aiden Hale stood surrounded by a small circle of colleagues and old friends. The weight of quiet authority rested naturally on him now. His once boyish features had sharpened with time, his jawline defined, his confidence calm and precise. The dark suit he wore looked like it had been tailored with intent, a perfect reflection of the man he had become. After his father's passing, Aiden had taken over Hale Industries, a name now whispered in admiration across business circles. He'd expanded it, modernized it, turned it into something both ruthless and visionary. Yet, in moments like this, beneath the polite smiles and firm handshakes, something unspoken flickered behind his eyes. He was listening, laughing even, when one of his friends nudged him. "You look like a CEO even when you're pretending to relax," joked Daniel, swirling his drink. Aiden smirked faintly. "Old habits," he replied, though his gaze drifted toward the ballroom entrance for no reason he could name. Or maybe for one he had never stopped knowing. The double doors at the end of a hall opened. And just like that, conversations softened, laughter faltered. Heads turned. Emily Hayes stepped in, framed by the soft amber light spilling from the chandeliers above. For a second, the air itself seemed to pause. She wore a deep emerald gown, simple, graceful, devastatingly elegant. Her hair was pulled into a low knot, stray strands brushing her neck in deliberate imperfection. Every movement was controlled, assured, as though she'd walked into dozens of rooms like this one and owned each of them. It wasn't the kind of beauty that begged for attention. It commanded it. The crowd reacted in layers. Someone gasped softly. A woman by the bar tilted her head, lips curling in faint envy. A few whispered to one another, old classmates recognizing her, connecting the Emily they'd once known to the one who now carried herself like a woman reborn. Aiden stood still. For a heartbeat, he forgot to breathe. The memories hit like echoes, her laughter, her anger, the way she used to look at him like he was both the problem and the answer. But that was years ago. And the woman before him was not the girl he'd once loved. Emily, the founder of Hayes Innovate, he'd read about her in business columns, seen her quoted beside people twice her age. She'd built something from scratch and turned it into a company that others wanted to buy, but couldn't afford. Now, she walked into the room like she had no ghosts behind her, no pain, no past. And yet Aiden felt the ghost of her everywhere. "Is that?" Marcus started, leaning closer to Daniel. "Emily Hayes," Daniel finished, eyes widening.
Wow.
She really turned out. He let out a low whistle. "Damn. Aiden, you dated her, didn't you?" Aiden didn't answer. He kept his gaze steady, too steady. Marcus chuckled. "Man, I should have asked her out back in college instead of wasting time on her roommate. What was I thinking?" That earned him a cold, sharp stare from Aiden, enough to freeze the grin on his face. Daniel laughed nervously. "Easy, Hale. He's just kidding." Aiden's jaw flexed once before he turned back to his glass. "Sure," he said quietly, though the edge in his tone was unmistakable. Emily moved through the room like she was tracing a map of her past. Professors she'd once idolized greeted her warmly. Old classmates hovered between awe and discomfort, unsure whether to approach. She smiled, gracefully conversational, her laughter soft and unhurried. When she spoke, people leaned in to listen. She talked about her startup, about mentoring women founders, about the work that actually mattered. She was composed, brilliant, radiant, and untouched by nostalgia. But every now and then, as she paused to accept a compliment or sip her drink, she could feel it. Aiden's gaze. Steady, searching, unrelenting. She didn't look back. Not once. To everyone else, it looked effortless, her calm detachment, her ease in the crowd. But beneath it all, Emily felt the strain of being watched by the one person she'd once thought she'd never see again. Still, she held her ground. She'd learned to. The night stretched on. Music swelled and laughter filled the room again, though it never returned to the same carefree rhythm. Aiden remained at a distance, observing her the way one watches a storm from across the shore, knowing he'd once stood in its center. His friends had drifted into jokes and business chatter, but Aiden stayed quiet. Once, when Emily laughed at something Professor Clark said, her eyes caught a glint of candlelight, and Aiden's chest tightened. She was happy, genuinely so, and the sight of it both hurt and healed something in him. By the time the evening began to thin, some guests had left, others lingered for photographs. The lights dimmed to a softer glow. Emily set her glass down, exchanged a few polite goodbyes, and turned toward the exit. Aiden saw her before anyone else did. She walked past the tables, her gown whispering against the polished floor. She didn't falter, didn't glance his way, not even when she was near enough that he could have reached out and stopped her. He didn't move. Her perfume brushed past him like a memory, subtle, fleeting. Then the sound of her heels faded into silence. Aiden turned, almost without realizing it, watching through the tall glass doors as she crossed the driveway. Her car waited at the curb, headlights cutting through the night. The door opened. She stepped inside, and before the driver pulled away, for the briefest second, her face caught the reflection of the lights, calm, unreadable. Then she was gone. Aiden stood there long after the car disappeared down the avenue. Around him, the music played on, oblivious. But for him, the night had ended the moment she walked in, and ended again the moment she left. The night had gone quiet by the time Aiden returned home. The mansion stood at the edge of the city, an architectural masterpiece of glass and stone that looked out over the river. The kind of house people dreamed of owning, but to Aiden, it had long since lost the warmth of a home. He loosened his tie as he entered, the faint echo of the reunion party still buzzing in his head like static. The laughter, the chatter, the music, it all blurred into the background, except for one image that refused to fade. Emily. Her name alone felt like a ghost moving through the empty halls. He poured himself a drink, just a single pour of whiskey, and sank into the leather armchair by the window. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, cold and distant, just like the life he'd built for himself. He'd seen her tonight, after all these years, and somehow, it still didn't feel real. He thought of the past, the years at university, when they were inseparable. Back then, Aiden Hale was the golden boy, top of every class, captain of the debate team, admired, envied, untouchable. Until Emily came along. She was brilliant. Not loud, not boastful, just quietly exceptional. At first, he'd admired her drive. Then he'd fallen for it. But somewhere along the line, admiration turned into comparison, and comparison into resentment. He remembered the day everything cracked. The results of the final semester had been announced. Emily had come out on top. For the first time, Aiden wasn't number one. Everyone had celebrated her, and she'd looked radiant, proud, so full of light.
And
He'd felt something ugly twist inside him. That evening, at a campus event, someone had made a teasing remark about him losing his crown. Aiden, defensive and reckless, had said something cruel, something he could never take back. He'd humiliated her. In front of their friends, their professors, everyone. The words had left his mouth before he could stop them, mocking her success as a lucky streak, belittling her in the one way he knew would hurt most. He remembered the look in her eyes, that stunned, silent heartbreak. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't cried. She had just looked at him like he'd become a stranger. And from that moment he had been. They stopped talking after that. She withdrew completely, refused his apologies, refused even to be near him. By graduation, they were just two names called on the same stage, clapping politely for one another, both pretending they hadn't once been everything to each other. And then she was gone. The company had grown. Hale Industries was now a force across multiple sectors: technology, infrastructure, energy. He'd built it into what his father had always dreamed it could be. And yet, sitting here in his silent home, Aiden felt none of the pride others assumed he carried. He had everything: wealth, respect, influence, but his victories felt hollow. His mother still checked on him every Sunday, her kindness the only softness left in his life. His younger sister, Clara, often teased him about being too serious, too composed. "You run a company, Aiden," she'd say, "not a military." He'd always smiled, but inside, he knew she was right. Success had become a wall, one he'd built so high that no one could see what he'd buried beneath it. But tonight, the wall cracked. When Emily walked into that reunion hall, every polished layer of control had fallen apart. She was different now, elegant, confident, composed. The founder of her own company, respected and admired in her own right. She carried herself like she owed the world nothing, and perhaps she didn't. And Aiden could barely look away. Every detail of her voice, her poise, the calm assurance in her movements, reminded him of what he'd destroyed. The way she'd laughed with her old professors, the way people gathered around her in admiration, it was everything he once wanted, everything he'd once envied. He'd stood there, watching her glide through the room, and for a moment, he'd almost convinced himself that maybe she'd look his way. Just once. But she hadn't. She hadn't even given him the courtesy of anger. Her silence was worse, precise, deliberate, a statement that said she no longer owed him anything. And that realization had hit harder than any words could have. He caught his reflection in the glass again and almost laughed at himself. The man who had once mocked her success now sat here haunted by it. He had built an empire, but the victory felt hollow. Because in some buried corner of his soul, he knew she had won something he never could: peace. He leaned back, eyes closing briefly as the faint scent of her perfume replayed in his mind. He remembered the way she used to smell of vanilla and ink and something faintly floral. Tonight it was different, richer, sharper, like her. He took another sip of whiskey. He wondered if she'd been pretending not to notice him, or if she truly hadn't cared at all. He wondered if she'd already moved on, if there was someone else, someone who got to hear her laugh now. For years, Aiden had buried himself in work, telling himself he was too busy for love, too focused for regret. But now, with the city's quiet hum outside and the image of Emily walking away replaying in his mind, the truth pressed down on him. He'd never stopped thinking about her. Not for a single year. He finished his drink and set the glass down gently. Would he ever see her again? Would fate give him even a moment to speak, to say the words he should have said years ago, to apologize without expectation, to finally face the version of himself he'd tried to forget? The city outside flickered in silence. Somewhere out there, she was living her life, far from his shadow, and as the clock struck midnight, Aiden Hale sat alone in his gleaming, empty home, haunted by the echo of a name that still refused to fade. Emily. The sound of the city faded behind her as the car pulled up to her home. Emily stepped out, heels clicking softly against the stone driveway. The night air was cool, sharp, alive with a faint hum of distant traffic. Her house, a modern space of glass, wood, and quiet elegance, stood on a hill overlooking the lights below. It was exactly the kind of place she had dreamed of owning when she was younger. Open, calm, her own. And yet, as she unlocked the door and stepped into the silence, something inside her felt heavier than it had all week. The reunion had gone well. Everyone had said so. She'd smiled, spoken with old professors, caught up with familiar faces. People had admired her success, congratulated her on the company, called her an inspiration. It should have felt gratifying. It didn't, because Aiden had been there. She hadn't expected him to look so different. Older, yes, sharper, more self-assured, but also quieter. There was something restrained in the way he carried himself, something that almost made her wonder if he'd changed. Almost. She'd felt his gaze on her all evening, and she'd done everything she could not to look back. Emily set her bag down and poured herself a glass of water. The house was still, the only sound the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. She walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline. It glittered beautifully in the distance, 1,000 tiny lives happening at once, lives she had fought hard to build her place among. After college, life had not been kind to her. The humiliation Aiden caused that day had cut deeper than she ever admitted. To be mocked publicly by the one person she'd trusted most, there had been no words for it. She'd left the campus that evening feeling like the ground had vanished beneath her. For weeks, she couldn't even look people in the eye. But something inside her had refused to stay broken. She'd buried herself in work, internships, late nights, endless learning. She'd taken a job at a small consultancy firm where no one knew her story, no one looked at her with pity. Within a year, she'd become their youngest analyst. 2 years later, she'd quit to start her own company, a decision everyone called reckless at the time. Hayes Innovate had begun with just 3 people and 1 cluttered apartment office. Now, 5 years later, it was a thriving startup with clients across the country. She'd built it from the ground up. Every risk, every sleepless night, every decision had been hers. People called her confident, fearless, unshakable. But confidence was something she'd earned one scar at a time. Her mother had been her anchor through it all, steady, practical, endlessly patient. When Emily had wanted to give up, her mother had simply said, "You don't owe anyone your pain. Turn it into purpose instead." Her younger brother, Noah, was still in university, studying architecture. He often called late at night to talk about his projects or just to check on her. His easy humor was the one thing that could still make her laugh on difficult days. She wasn't lonely, not really. She had her company, her home, her small circle of friends, and a peace she had fought hard to create. And yet, tonight, that peace trembled. She hadn't wanted to go to the reunion. When the invitation had arrived, she almost declined. But something, a quiet curiosity, maybe, had made her say yes. And there he was.
Aiden Hale.
The same man who had once been her best friend, her love, and her undoing. The same man who had taught her how ambition could turn cruel when pride felt threatened. She thought time would dull the memory, but seeing him again brought everything back. The laughter, the long study nights, the quiet understanding they'd once shared before it all shattered. He had looked at her like he wanted to speak, maybe even apologize. But she wasn't ready to hear it. Because forgiveness wasn't about one night of regret. It was about years of silence. Emily walked to the terrace and leaned against the railing. The city breeze brushed against her hair, cool and soft. From here, she could see the faint reflection of herself in the glass door, composed, elegant, every detail in place. She had built that version of herself carefully, brick by brick, so the world would never see the cracks beneath. But beneath it all, her heart still carried the faint echo of who she'd been, the girl who once believed love could be simple. For a moment, she closed her eyes. She remembered the way he had looked tonight, taller, calmer, but with that same intensity in his eyes. It had almost hurt to see it again, that mixture of pride and regret. And despite herself, a small part of her wondered if he had changed. If he'd ever thought about that day. If he'd ever regretted it as much as she had been forced to live with it. Her phone buzzed on the table behind her. A message from her assistant reminding her of a morning meeting. She smiled faintly, grateful for the distraction. Work, at least, was simple, predictable. It didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Emily turned off the lights and headed to her room. The house sank into quiet darkness. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint glow of the city seeping through the curtains. She told herself the reunion didn't matter, that seeing him again had changed nothing, that she'd built a life beyond him, above him. And most of that was true. But still, somewhere deep inside, hidden beneath the calm, the memory of his eyes followed her into sleep. The conference hall gleamed with glass and ambition. Rows of banners stretched across the foyer, the air buzzing with conversation, camera flashes, and the faint scent of polished wood and espresso. Emily walked in with practiced poise, her heels tapping lightly against the marble floor, her badge clipped neatly to her blazer. Emily Hayes, founder and CEO, Hayes Innovate. It had been 10 days since the reunion. 10 long days of pushing the memory of Aiden Hale to the back of her mind. She was here for business, a joint industry conference bringing together tech innovators and corporate leaders. Nothing more. Her company had been shortlisted for a major government-backed sustainability initiative, one that could define their next 5 years. She had prepped for weeks, focused, unflinching. But when she stepped into the central hall, the world decided to test her composure again. Emily, over here. A familiar voice, one of the senior consultants she'd met months ago, waved her over. He was standing near the main panel stage, talking animatedly to a group of executives. She walked toward him, smiling politely. "Emily Hayes," he said warmly as she approached. "Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet someone. This is Aiden Hale, CEO of Hale Industries." "Aiden, this is..." "I know who she is," Aiden said quietly. Emily froze for half a second, but her face betrayed nothing. "Mr. Hale," she said evenly, her voice smooth and professional. "It's been a while." Aiden inclined his head slightly. "Ms. Hayes." The air between them tightening with the weight of unspoken memory. Emily was the first to pull back. Her composure didn't falter, but her pulse did. If anyone else noticed the tension, they didn't show it. The consultant continued, oblivious. "It's great you two already know each other. You'll be working closely on this initiative. Hale Industries and Hayes Innovate are both part of the new Green Infrastructure Program. You'll be collaborating on the pilot project together." Emily blinked once. "I'm sorry, did you say together?" "Exactly," he said cheerfully. "Your company's analytics and Hale's manufacturing wing. Perfect synergy. You'll make an incredible team." Aiden's lips twitched, the faintest curve threatening at the corner. Not quite a smile, not quite restraint. Emily caught it instantly. Her eyes narrowed, just for a moment, a sharp flash of irritation that she smoothed away behind a polite nod. "That's wonderful news," she said, her tone clipped but steady. Aiden's gaze held hers for a moment longer than was polite. "It certainly is," he replied softly. They moved through the introductions, exchanging formalities with other executives, but neither could quite ignore the undercurrent between them. Every time Emily spoke, Aiden found himself listening more than he should, the confidence in her tone, the clarity in her logic. And every time she caught him watching, she looked away, lips pressed tight, as if refusing to give him the satisfaction of acknowledgement. At one point, during a coffee break, they found themselves standing near the same table, purely by accident. Or maybe fate had a sense of humor. Aiden reached for the cream at the same time she did. Their hands brushed. Emily withdrew, hers instantly. "Go ahead," she said curtly. "Still not fond of sharing space, I see," he said lightly, trying to hide the faint warmth in his tone. She looked at him, one brow arched. "Still fond of testing boundaries, I see." He smiled, small, amused, genuine this time. Touché. Through the morning sessions, their paths crossed repeatedly, panel discussions, Q&A rounds, photo ops. Aiden spoke with his characteristic poise, his words measured, persuasive. Emily, when it was her turn, held the room effortlessly, her slides clean, her argument sharp. The professionals around them exchanged impressed glances, whispering about the potential of their upcoming collaboration. But beneath the surface of civility, the tension simmered. When the moderator praised both companies for their shared vision, Aiden caught her eye across the room. She looked away instantly, busying herself with her notes. He fought the urge to smile again. It wasn't amusement anymore, it was something else. Something like disbelief that after all these years, she could still undo his composure with a single glance. After lunch, as the crowd began to disperse, Emily walked toward the exit to take a brief call. The conversation was short, a logistics update from her team, but when she turned, Aiden was there, waiting by the doorway. "Emily," he said, his voice low. She hesitated. "Mr. Hale." He exhaled faintly, almost smiling at the formality. "We're really going to do this, aren't we?" "It's business," she replied. "I'm sure we can manage that much." Aiden studied her for a second, the calm in her expression, the precision in her tone. He wondered if she could tell that his heart hadn't quite learned to behave around her. "I have no doubt," he said finally, his voice softer than before. "Though I'll admit, I didn't expect the universe to be this ironic." She gave him a tight, almost smile. "The universe has a sense of humor. I don't." And with that, she turned and walked away, her stride perfectly steady, even though her pulse was anything but. Behind her, Aiden watched, that faint smirk tugging at his lips again. Not arrogance, just disbelief. For the first time in years, Emily found herself annoyed, not because of him, but because of herself. Because even now, she could feel that same electric pull she'd sworn she'd buried long ago. She took a deep breath, shoulders squared, and walked into the next meeting room, her mind already switching gears. But somewhere inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Whatever she and Aiden Hale had once been, fate wasn't finished with them yet. The meeting room on the 23rd floor smelled faintly of coffee and new paper. Floor-to-ceiling windows poured sunlight across the long oak table, catching on steel pens and glass water carafes. Emily arrived 5 minutes early, laptop open, slides ready, every movement crisp and deliberate. Aiden was already there. He stood near the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled to the elbow, scanning a report. The morning light softened the edges of his profile, and for one unguarded second, she almost saw the boy she'd once known, before memory caught up and she tucked the thought away. "Ms. Hayes," he greeted, turning. His tone was polite, neutral, carefully measured. "Mr. Hale." She set her laptop down, the click of its case sounding louder than it should. Let's keep this brief. I have another review after lunch. Of course. Aiden took his seat opposite hers, his smile barely there. Efficiency has always been one of your finer qualities. Emily's gaze flicked up. Back then you used to call it impatience. He shrugged lightly. Maybe I've learned to appreciate precision. Their eyes met, half challenge, half truce, and then the door opened as the project team filed in. For the next hour, conversation revolved around data models, infrastructure planning, and logistics. Emily spoke with quiet authority, clicking through her presentation as the team from Hale Industries took notes. Aiden listened, occasionally asking questions that were sharp but fair. Still, there was something under the surface. Every word, every glance, an echo of unfinished business. When she outlined a cost-saving framework that contradicted his projections, he leaned forward. So, you're suggesting we trim 10% from initial production? 12, she corrected, eyes steady. If the projections hold, we can reinvest in design without cutting quality. He studied her for a beat, then nodded. Ambitious. Effective, she countered. Ambition without results is just theater, Mr. Hale. The team laughed softly. Even Aiden's lips curved. Touché again, Ms. Hayes. The old rhythm returned, the intellectual fencing that had once drawn them together. Only now the stakes were real, and every word carried the weight of history. When the team finally dispersed for a short break, the room emptied, leaving just the two of them and the quiet hum of the city outside. Emily closed her laptop and leaned back slightly. You're unusually quiet, she said without looking up. Just admiring how you dismantled half my department's assumptions in under an hour. Old habits, she replied coolly. Aiden smiled faintly. I remember. You never did like losing. She met his gaze. No. But I learned something from you. Winning doesn't mean much if you have to fake it. The words landed with more precision than any argument. Aiden's expression faltered for a moment, and the air shifted. Emily, he began, but she cut in gently. Don't, she said, voice soft but firm. Whatever you're about to say, it won't change what happened. He nodded once, accepting it, though something wounded flickered in his eyes. Fair enough. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that hums with everything unspoken. Then, to her surprise, he chuckled quietly. You know, I actually missed this. She raised an eyebrow. Being contradicted? Being challenged, he said. Most people agree with me now. It's boring. Emily almost smiled despite herself. Then consider this partnership an antidote. The door swung open again. Their teams returned, refreshed and chatty. The next round of discussion began, light-hearted brainstorming this time, about branding and outreach. At one point, Aiden proposed a tagline that made half the table pause. Emily gave him a look that could curdle coffee. You're joking, right? He grinned. It's memorable. It's terrible, she said, deadpan. Unless your goal is to make the campaign sound like a toothpaste ad. The room erupted in laughter. Even Aiden laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. He glanced at her then, and the warmth of it caught her off guard. For a heartbeat, the tension between them loosened, replaced by something lighter. Something that felt dangerously close to what used to be. As the meeting drew to a close, the project lead summarized next steps. Emily gathered her notes, preparing to leave. Aiden rose when she did. Emily, he said quietly as the others filed out. Before you go. She stopped, looking at him with that careful neutrality she wore like armor. I know you don't trust me, he said. And you have every reason not to. But I meant what I said earlier. I don't fake things anymore. Her expression didn't soften, but her eyes flickered, just a trace of something like surprise. "I'm not here to fight old battles," she replied. "But if you plan on playing the same games, I'll warn you now, I can still beat you." Without pretending, Aiden exhaled, half amused, half sad. "I never doubted that." For a moment, neither moved. The city light glinted between them, turning dust motes into gold. Then Emily gathered her files and walked toward the door. "Good. Let's keep it professional, Mr. Hale." "Of course," he said, though the faint curve at his lips betrayed him. She paused just long enough to catch it. "And lose the smirk," she added, eyes narrowing playfully. "It's outdated." That earned a quiet laugh from him, low and genuine. "Noted." When the door closed behind her, the room felt emptier than it should have. Aiden stood there for a while, watching the faint reflection of her retreating form in the glass. Somewhere between amusement and regret, he whispered to himself, "Still unbeatable." And down the hall, Emily allowed herself one small breath of satisfaction, because for once, she'd left first, and the last word was hers. The following weeks passed in a rhythm of meetings, schedules, and long hours that blurred the line between rivalry and teamwork. What had begun as wary cooperation slowly shifted into something that resembled understanding. They argued, of course, often and intensely, but there was laughter too, quiet and surprising, slipping into the spaces between their words. Aiden found himself anticipating her sarcasm. Emily learned to read the small pauses in his tone that meant he was thinking, not judging. By the end of the second month, their companies had merged workflows so seamlessly that even the senior executives began to joke they were two halves of one relentless brain. Neither of them denied it. The city's winter gala for innovators was held in the Grand Meridian Hotel, a glittering sea of black suits, evening gowns, and string quartet music. Emily arrived later than planned, her car pulling up beneath the arched lights. When she stepped out, the crowd at the entrance seemed to still for a moment. Her gown was a shade of midnight blue that caught the light with every movement. Simple, elegant, impossible to ignore. She carried herself with effortless grace, the sort born of years spent proving herself in rooms that had once dismissed her. Across the hall, Aiden was speaking with a group of foreign investors when he saw her. His words faltered mid-sentence. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely nervous. He had faced boardrooms full of cynics, political panels, and the press, but the sight of Emily walking through the crowd made his heartbeat stumble like a rookie. She caught his gaze briefly and offered a polite smile. It wasn't quite warm, but it wasn't cold either. A truce, perhaps. "Miss Hayes," he greeted as she approached the partnership table. "Mr. Hale," she replied, voice light, teasing even. "Don't look so shocked. You invited me." He laughed quietly. "I invited your company. You're just its most remarkable representative." "Flattery doesn't suit you," she said, though a faint color rose to her cheeks. They mingled, answered questions, discussed the project. Cameras flashed. Champagne was poured. For a while, everything was simple, two professionals making small talk under crystal chandeliers. Until it wasn't. Near the end of the evening, an older patron, one of the event's longtime donors, cornered Emily by the edge of the ballroom. His words began politely enough, a compliment here, a question there, until his hand brushed too close to her arm. She froze. "Please don't," she said evenly, trying to step back. The man leaned in again, laughing it off. Before Emily could move, Aiden was there. His hand closed around the man's wrist, firm, controlled, but unyielding. "That's enough," Aiden said, his voice low and steady. The old man sputtered in protest, but one look at Aiden's expression silenced him. The entire exchange lasted seconds. Security staff noticed and hurried over, guiding the man away with whispered apologies. Emily stood rooted to the spot, her pulse still racing. Aiden turned to her, eyes softening instantly. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly.
I've fine.
He just caught me off guard. Aiden reached out, then hesitated, unsure whether to touch her. Finally, she let out a shaky breath, and he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he murmured. "You're safe." The tremor in her hands gave her away. She wasn't used to being startled, not anymore. For years, she'd been the one in control, the unshakable voice in every room. The sudden vulnerability unsettled her more than the incident itself. When she looked up, their eyes met, close now, too close. Something shifted between them. The noise of the gala seemed to fade until there was only the rhythm of their breathing. Aiden brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch tentative. Emily. She didn't stop him. The gratitude, the relief, the years of buried tension converged in that single instant. Their lips met, gentle, searching, not desperate but certain, the kind of kiss that felt like remembering rather than discovering. For a few suspended seconds, the world was still. Then reality flooded back. Emily pulled away first, breath catching. Her eyes widened, shock, confusion, emotion tangled into one. "I shouldn't have," she began, stepping back. "Emily, wait." But she was already shaking her head. "I can't," she whispered, voice breaking slightly. "Not after everything." He took a step toward her, stopping when she held up a trembling hand. "Please," she said softly, "just not now." And before he could say another word, she turned and walked away, the hem of her gown brushing against the marble floor as the crowd swallowed her up. Aiden stood there, heart pounding, the taste of regret mixing with the echo of her warmth. He'd protected her without thinking, reacted on instinct, but the aftermath felt far more dangerous than the confrontation itself. Outside, the night air bit cold against his skin. He looked toward the street where her car had just disappeared, headlights vanishing into the distance. He ran a hand through his hair, half in disbelief, half in something dangerously close to hope. For the first time since she'd come back into his life, he realized how fragile the line between past and present had become. And somewhere inside him, a voice whispered the truth he could no longer ignore. He wasn't done fighting for her. But this time, it would have to be with honesty, not pride. 3 days. That was how long Emily had successfully avoided both the office and Aiden Hale. Her team had received polite messages about her needing rest, her assistant had delivered files to her apartment door, and her fridge had become a museum of half-eaten takeout containers. She wasn't exactly sick, just scrambled. Since the gala, her emotions had been a whirlwind she couldn't name. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Aiden's face that night, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes, the way his voice had softened when he said her name, and the kiss that still lingered somewhere between disbelief and memory. She groaned and buried her face in a pillow. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to herself, voice muffled by the cushion. "You're a CEO, not a teenager." But logic didn't help. Not when her heart insisted on replaying every stolen second. Her apartment was a quiet mix of modern warmth and chaos. Documents scattered across the coffee table, 2 mugs on the counter, a half-finished pint of ice cream beside her laptop. By the 3rd day, she'd settled into a routine of binge-watching documentaries she didn't actually follow and scrolling through emails she pretended to ignore. Until the doorbell rang. She frowned, setting down her spoon. Who even? When she opened the door, every bit of air in her lungs vanished. Him. "You're impossible." "Occupational hazard," he replied, setting the bag on her counter. "Can we talk?" For a moment, silence filled the space, comfortable but charged. Emily crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. You really think showing up here is a good idea? Probably not, Aiden admitted. But I couldn't stop thinking about you. She hesitated, torn between irritation and something dangerously close to affection. About that night, he continued, voice lower. I didn't plan any of it. I just reacted. I was scared for you. And when you looked at me afterward, she swallowed hard. Aiden, we can't just erase everything that happened before. The humiliation, the anger. I'm not trying to erase it, he said gently. I'm trying to be better than it. His sincerity disarmed her. He looked different now, not the arrogant, unflappable Aiden from college, but someone open, uncertain, real. Her defenses wavered. I don't know if I can trust you again, she admitted. Then let me earn it, he said quietly. The words hung there, simple, unpolished, honest. They talked for hours after that, drifting from confessions to laughter. She teased him about his terrible coffee habits. He reminded her of the time she'd spilled tea all over his presentation slides in college. The air softened, the years between them melting away one story at a time. At one point, she caught him looking at her, not the way he used to, with pride or possession, but with warmth. What? She asked, flustered. Nothing, he said, smiling faintly. Just glad you opened the door. Her heart betrayed her with a flutter. When the conversation finally slowed, the city outside had gone dark. Rain drizzled against the windows, a soft percussion that filled the quiet. Emily stood, moving to close the curtains, but Aiden caught her hand. She turned back, and the world seemed to still again, just as it had at the gala. There was no rush, no confusion this time, just a slow, inevitable closeness that neither of them fought. When their lips met, it wasn't explosive or impulsive. It was gentle, unspoken forgiveness. And when they eventually rested together, the night faded softly, leaving only warmth and a steady rhythm of two hearts learning to trust again. Morning sunlight spilled through the curtains. Emily stirred first, blinking blearily at the clock, and then froze. Oh no, she whispered. Aiden, half asleep beside her on the couch, looked up. My mother, Emily said, sitting up in a panic. She texted last night. They're visiting today. They? Aiden repeated, rubbing his eyes. My mother and my brother. She rushed to the bedroom, pulling on a robe. You have to, I don't know, hide. Too late.
The doorbell rang.
Aiden laughed quietly. Well, that's our cue. Emily glared. Don't you dare make jokes. The door swung open to reveal Mrs. Hayes, cheerful and armed with a casserole dish. Her younger brother, Ryan, trailed behind her with a mischievous grin. Emily's sweetheart, her mother exclaimed, stepping inside, then paused as she noticed Aiden standing there, awkwardly buttoning his cuff. Oh, Mrs. Hayes blinked, surprised. And who might this handsome young man be? Aiden recovered instantly, extending a hand with charming composure.
Aiden Hale, Mom.
Emily's boyfriend. Emily's jaw dropped. Aiden, she hissed under her breath. Mrs. Hayes, delighted, clasped her hands together. Boyfriend? Oh, Emily, you didn't tell me. Finally, Ryan snorted from behind her. So, this is the mysterious guy who made you smile at your phone last week. Emily shot her brother a look that could melt steel. Ryan. Aiden, suppressing a grin, took the casserole dish from Mrs. Hayes. It smells wonderful, Mrs. Hayes. Oh, call me Margaret, she said, beaming. Your family now. Emily groaned softly, but there was no stopping it. Her mother had already marched into the kitchen, talking about breakfast. An hour later, the apartment smelled of pancakes and coffee. Mrs. Hayes was chatting animatedly with Aiden, who, much to Emily's disbelief, was actually laughing with her mother like they'd known each other for years. Ryan had taken it upon himself to quiz Aiden on sports trivia, apparently to test his worth. Aiden, to his credit, played along gamely. Emily leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching the chaos unfold. Her mother leaned over to her and whispered, "He's charming, dear. Don't let this one go." Emily sighed, hiding a small, reluctant smile. "It's complicated." Mrs. Hayes winked. "The best things usually are." Across the room, Aiden caught her gaze, his eyes warm, a hint of mischief there. And for the first time in years, Emily let herself smile back, just a little, realizing that maybe, just maybe, the story between them wasn't over yet. The office had never felt louder. Ever since the boyfriend declaration, Aiden's impulsive, shameless move that had left Emily half mortified, half melting, their dynamic had changed. Whispers followed them through the corridors of Hale and Hayes Innovations. People tried to be discreet, but the sidelong glances, the too innocent smiles, the quiet giggles when they entered a meeting together, it was impossible to miss. "Morning, Miss Hayes," Aiden greeted one day as they crossed paths near the elevator. "Mr. Hale," she replied evenly, eyes straight ahead. "Would you prefer boyfriend?" he teased, lowering his voice. Her glare could have curdled steel. "You're enjoying this far too much." "Comes with a title," he said, lips twitching. She huffed, stepping into the elevator. "You are impossible." "And yet," he murmured, following her inside, "you still haven't fired me." The door slid shut on her faint, reluctant smile. The first weeks after that morning blurred into something unexpected. Ease. Emily had spent years perfecting her armor, sharp words, straight posture, a cool distance that kept everyone guessing. But with Aiden, the armor began to crack, not from pressure, but from laughter. He brought her coffee before big meetings. She poked holes in his presentations, usually with a smirk. Their banter became the office's unofficial soundtrack. Yet beneath the teasing was something quieter, a new rhythm of partnership. Aiden no longer led every discussion. He listened. Emily no longer pushed him away at every turn. She allowed moments of softness, brief but real. One evening, they stayed late finalizing a presentation. The office was nearly empty, city lights spilling across the glass walls. "You used to hate silence," she said suddenly. He looked up from his laptop. "I used to fill it because I didn't like what I'd hear if it stayed." She studied him for a moment. "And now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I kind of like it, especially when you're in it." Her heart skipped a beat, but she masked it with a quiet, "That's dangerously close to poetic, Hale." "Occupational hazard," he said again, and she laughed softly. A few weekends later, Mrs. Hayes insisted they visit for dinner. A proper one, as she called it, since last time was chaos. Emily dreaded it slightly. Aiden, however, seemed genuinely delighted. Margaret Hayes greeted him like a returning hero, ushering him in with a plate of freshly baked cookies. Ryan clapped him on the back. Even the family cat, normally disdainful of guests, wound around Aiden's legs like they'd been friends for years. "Mom, you're spoiling him," Emily protested, taking the tray of cookies away. "Oh, hush, he's family," her mother said, smiling. "He looks thin." "Thin." Aiden chuckled. "That's the first time anyone said that since college." Ryan grinned. "You should hear the way Mom talks about you when Emily's not around." "Ryan," Emily warned, but her brother just laughed harder. Dinner was loud, messy, and perfect. Margaret told stories from Emily's childhood that made her groan and Aiden grin. By dessert, the tension that had shadowed them for months was gone, replaced by warmth, familiarity, something that felt dangerously like home. As they were leaving, Mrs. Hayes pulled Aiden aside. "She's been through a lot," she said softly. "Don't make her regret trusting again." He met her gaze steadily. I won't. And somehow, she believed him. 2 weeks later, it was Aiden's turn. Emily was nervous. Meeting the Hales meant stepping into the marble and glass world that had once separated them. But to her surprise, Aiden's mother, Evelyn, welcomed her with quiet grace. "I've heard so much about you," Evelyn said, taking her hands warmly. "He never stops talking." Aiden groaned. "Mom." Evelyn smiled knowingly. "He used to talk about your debates in college, you know. Drove us all crazy. Said you were the only one who ever beat him fair and square." Emily blinked, startled. "He said that?" "Constantly," Evelyn said. "And now look, you're beating him at life too." Clara, Aiden's younger sister, leaned in conspiratorially. "Finally someone who can handle him." Aiden gave up trying to protest, retreating toward the coffee tray while Emily tried not to laugh. Later, when the family dinner wound down, Evelyn hugged her before they left. "Thank you for making my son human again," she whispered. Emily smiled, eyes stinging unexpectedly. "He does that for me too." Back at work, the rumors had quieted. The project they'd built together was nearing completion, and investors were thrilled. But in the quiet spaces, late meetings, shared car rides, coffee breaks, they were no longer just colleagues. They were two people rediscovering how to fall without fear. One night after a presentation, they walked along the river, the city skyline reflected in the water. "I never thought we'd get here," Emily said softly. "Neither did I." Aiden's hand brushed hers. She didn't pull away. "I keep thinking this can't be real," she admitted. "After everything," he smiled gently. "Then let's make it real." She looked up at him, searching his face, and found no trace of the boy who had once humiliated her, only the man who had spent every day since trying to be better. "All right," she said finally, "but on my terms." Aiden's grin returned, boyish and sincere. Wouldn't dream of anything else. A month later, both families met, an idea Emily had originally declared potentially catastrophic. It wasn't. The Hayes house buzzed with conversation, Margaret trading recipes with Evelyn, Clara showing Ryan how to make cocktail mocktails, and Aiden quietly sneaking glances at Emily across the room. When their eyes met, she mouthed, "What?" He shook his head, smiling. "Just happy," he whispered later when they slipped onto the porch together. She leaned against the railing, soft light catching her hair. "You're not usually this sentimental."
I'm learning, he said.
"Blame your mother's cooking." Emily laughed quietly. "She already wants to adopt you." "She'd have to fight my mom for it," he said, and they both laughed, the sound mingling with the hum of voices inside. The night drew on. As families blended and stories overlapped, something subtle but unmistakable took root, a shared sense of peace, of things finally fitting where they were meant to. When Aiden reached for Emily's hand under the table, she didn't pull away this time. She just smiled, and he felt the weight of all their years, the rivalry, the distance, the hurt, lift like smoke from a blown-out candle. For the first time in forever, it didn't feel like Hale versus Hayes. It felt like them. The church bells rang clear across the valley, a sound so bright it seemed to wash the years clean. Outside, cars lined the cobbled lane, petals drifted on the breeze, and guests, old classmates, business partners, and family, gathered in clusters of laughter. Inside, sunlight poured through stained glass, scattering color over rows of white roses and folded programs that read, "Emily Hayes and Aiden Hale, together always." Aiden stood near the altar with his groomsmen, Evan, Marcus, and Leo, all college friends who still couldn't believe this day was real. "I swear," Evan whispered, straightening Aiden's tie, "I thought she'd murder you before she'd marry you." "Statistically, that was probable," Marcus added. Aiden laughed under his breath, shaking his head. Thanks for the confidence, guys. Leo grinned. We're proud of you, man. Just don't mess it up again. She's way out of your league. I know, Aiden said simply, and he meant it. Then the music shifted. Everyone rose. Emily appeared at the far end of the aisle, her arm linked with her brother Ryan's. For a moment, time forgot to move. She wore a gown of silk and lace, simple yet radiant, her smile soft but sure. The sight of her caught in the sunlight made even the gossiping former classmates fall silent. Aiden's throat tightened. He had imagined this moment 100 times, but reality outshone every memory. As she reached him, Ryan whispered something that made her laugh. Then she took Aiden's hand, steady, certain. You're staring, she murmured, cheeks faintly pink. I've waited years to, he replied. The ceremony was short, elegant, and achingly sincere. When it came time for their vows, Emily spoke first. I used to think love had to be perfect, she said, her voice clear but trembling. Then I met you, and everything became wonderfully, terribly real. We fought, we failed, but somehow, we found our way back. You taught me that forgiveness can build stronger foundations than pride ever could. Aiden's eyes glistened. When it was his turn, he took her hands. I once thought success meant never needing anyone. I was wrong. You're the reason I learned what strength really is, and I promise that from this day on, I'll never stop earning the right to stand beside you. Applause rippled softly as the officiant smiled. By the power vested in me, you may kiss your bride. The kiss drew cheers from their friends. Evan whistled, Clara cried, and Mrs. Hayes laughed through her tears. Even the skeptical college peers, who once remembered humiliation and rivalry, found themselves smiling. Time, it seemed, had rewritten the ending. Later that night, beneath strings of golden lights, they danced. The ballroom glowed, soft jazz playing, their families mingling like they'd known each other forever. Margaret Hayes was laughing with Evelyn Hale over cake recipes. Ryan and Clara were teasing each other like siblings already. It felt seamless, natural, like life had been waiting for this moment all along. Mrs. Hale, Aiden murmured as they swayed together. Emily smiled, head on his shoulder. That's going to take some getting used to. He looked down at her, eyes full of quiet wonder. You've been that to me for a long time. When the night finally waned, they stood outside under the fairy lights, shoes in hand, stars above them. The guests had gone, the music had faded, and the world felt still. Emily looked up at him. We made it. Aiden smiled. We began again. 5 years later, the Hale household was the opposite of quiet. Daddy, Ethan ate my cookie. 5-year-old Lila stomped into the living room, curls bouncing, face scrunched adorably. 2-year-old Ethan followed, chocolate all over his mouth, holding the half-eaten cookie like a trophy. Aiden lifted his son. Buddy, if you're going to commit cookie theft, at least hide the evidence. Ethan giggled. Lila planted her fists on her hips. See? You encourage him, Aiden whispered dramatically. Don't tell your mother. Too late, Emily said, appearing with a basket of laundry. All 3 of you are guilty. Lila raced into her arms. Mommy, Daddy is siding with Ethan again. Emily kissed her daughter's cheek. Of course he is. Look at that face. Ethan squealed and hugged Emily's leg. Aiden watched them with a warmth that never dulled. Even after 5 years, the sight of her with their children still pierced him with something tender. Their house became the blend of 2 worlds, Emily's calm discipline and Aiden's chaotic enthusiasm. Sundays were sacred. Brunch with both families, filled with noise, love, and way too many opinions. Margaret spoiled the children endlessly. Evelyn knitted tiny sweaters for Ethan he kept refusing to wear. Ryan taught Lila karate, moves that alarmed Emily. Clara hosted craft sessions that ended with the house covered in glitter. Life felt full. Not perfect, but beautifully alive. The garden glittered with balloons, tiny lights, and a table full of cupcakes Lila chose herself. Children darted everywhere, Ethan toddling behind them yelling, "Me too." When it came time to cut the cake, Margaret clapped her hands. "Everyone, gather around." Aiden lifted Lila onto the chair. "Make a big wish, princess." "I already have one," she yelled proudly. "And what's that?" Emily asked, laughing. "That mommy and daddy stay together forever." Aiden froze for a heartbeat, Emily, too. Then they both smiled, soft and full. "Wish granted," Aiden whispered, kissing her forehead as everyone clapped. After the party, that night, when the decorations cooled under the gentle night breeze and the kids slept, Aiden and Emily sat on the porch swing, holding mugs of warm tea. The lights shimmered overhead like small captured stars. Aiden glanced at the house, then at her. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Emily leaned against him. "Sometimes I think about that shy girl at the reunion avoiding your eyes." He chuckled. "And I think about the man who didn't dare breathe too loudly around her." "So much happened to bring us here," she whispered. "And I'd do it all again," he answered. She looked up at him, eyes soft. "We built something beautiful, didn't we?" Aiden threaded his fingers through hers. "Not built," he corrected gently. "We grew it." The wind rustled the lights. Laughter from inside. Ethan's sleepy babble floated into the night. Emily rested her head on his shoulder. Aiden kissed the top of her hair. Their family, their life, their love. It was imperfect, chaotic, loud, and absolutely right. They watched their glowing home, hand in hand, hearts full. And in that quiet, golden moment, they knew they had finally found their forever.